As Hashem, today's daf is Masechtas Zevachim Daf Peiches 88, and we will begin from the Mishnah on Daf Peiches Amud Aleph. So, just to recap, what we've learned so far is that that the mizbeach, if you put something puzzle on the mizbeach, it automatically has kedusha to it. So, if you drop, let's say, a korban that you shechted, and that you took the meat and you put it outside the Beis Hamikdash, and somehow you brought it back into the Beis Hamikdash, and someone put it onto the Mizbeach. It's a pasul of carbon because it was brought outside the Beis Hamikdash. The Chumash says that anything that touches the Mizbeach has a holiness. It says it right here. It says it right here in Mizbeach Kodesh Kedashim, Kol Negeh Mizbeach Yigdash. Anything that touches the Mizbeach becomes holy. So what you do is then you put it on the Mizbeach and you burn the carbon, because once you put it down before Hashem, so to speak, now put it all the way onto the Mizbeach, onto the fire. So we learned also yesterday in the last Mishnah that just like the Mizbeach has Kedusha to it, so also the ramp, and so also a kli shares, any keli that you have you put in, let's say, blood or oil or flour. We're going to use, let's say, the korban mincha picture. So here's a person who's donating flour for the Beis Hamikdash. So once he puts it into a kli shares, into a keli belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, so then that flour becomes holy. In other words, up until that time, if the flour that he's donating as a mincha will become tamei, what you could do is paid it, redeem it. You could redeem it because it only has kedushas damim. Now, very closely, when you makdish an animal and it says, "I want this animal to be holy as a carbon oila," there's no pidyon to it, because unless you brought it unless it gets a mum. But other than that, it has a kedushas aguf, and therefore is no redemption. However, a mincha, the flour, has redemption to it, and if it became tamei, you could redeem it as long as you didn't put it into the kli shares. Once you put it into the kli shares, and it got tamei, so if it got tamei, then you cannot redeem it anymore. You cannot redeem it anymore, and therefore we learned yesterday that really you shouldn't even bring this onto the mizbeach, onto the mizbeach, and that's it. So now the Mishnah begins. Okay, the Mishnah begins over here. Now, there are two types of measuring cups for different things that were used in the Beis Hamikdash. One, it was used for liquids, and that a kli that was used for liquids basically boils down to two things. One was a measuring cup, let's say, and one was a cup that was, let's say, a plate or something, or a cup that was used to catch the blood as you shecht it. So it was not a measuring cup, but it just was meant to hold liquids in it. So that was generally used for liquids. However, there are some cups that were used, the measuring kalim, that were used for only to measure dry foods, because dry needs, the only time you're going to use it is to measure it, to make sure that it's the right amount. Let's say it's supposed to be isarin soilis, half isarin, whatever, isarin, 2 isarin. So that was called a measuring cup. So the Mishnah begins. Kli halach, a measuring cup that's supposed to measure liquids. Mekachin es halach would only mekadish something that's a liquid, and therefore, if you put a dry thing into the keli that was only used for the liquids, it would not have kedusha to it. Umides hayavesh, if you have a dry cup, and here it's called a mida because generally the dry stuff that was in the Beis Hamikdash for kataris or whatever was generally measured out, and it had measuring cups. The kachins yavish, they would make the yavish holy. Again, What does it mean? It makes it holy, such that once it becomes into that cup, you can't redeem it anymore. You can't be paid it anymore. Ein kli halach mikadeshes is yavish v'lo yavish mikadeshes lach. A liquid cup cannot make a dry thing holy, and not a dry cup can make a liquid holy. And we're going to learn that this is limited, that only the measuring of the lach cannot make a yavish, cannot make something dry holy. But let's say if you would put flour into the cup of the cup that was used to catch the blood, that would make it holy. We're going to learn that in the Gemara. Now, that was just the stuff about dry and liquids. Now we're going to learn a little bit about the kalim of the Beis Hamikdash. Klei HaKodesh, a holy vessel, shnikfu, that got a hole in it. Let's say it was used to measure out a half a hin, and it got a hole in it. Now you could only measure out a quarter of a hin. If it could do what it's normal, if it could do similar to what it did before, shoya oisim vehein shleimim, and it's still complete. Let's say just the top got lobbed off, mikachin, then it's still a holy keli and can make other things kaddish. Vimlav, let's say it totally became damaged, and now you can't use it even to similar to what it was used before. Ein mikachin, it will not make anything that comes into it holy. The kulan and all these things that we said it makes an item holy, ain't mekachin el b'kodesh. Only if it was in the Beis Hamikdash, if the liquid or the dry item was in the keli in the Beis Hamikdash. But let's say you took the flour, and you took the flour and it was outside the Beis Hamikdash. You put the flour into the keli outside the Beis Hamikdash, then it doesn't become holy. It doesn't become Kedushas Aguf. If afterwards you bring it into the Beis Hamikdash, yes, it would become holy. But as long as it's outside the Beis Hamikdash, even if you're using a holy vessel, it would not become Kaddish. That's what the Mishnah continues. Here, by the way, in this picture over here, you have different measuring cups that were used to measure out the wine, oil, and things like that, or for the oil for the menorah, for menachos. Some things that they use to measure dry foods, like flour, and some things that were used to measure liquids, like wine or oil. Okay. So now we're going to discuss a couple of things in the Gemara. Amar Shmuel said, Lo Shana, we didn't learn in the Mishnah Elamidos that the Ein Klei Alach Mikadeshes Es Yabesh, a liquid does not kli for a liquid doesn't mikadesh, a dry thing, only midas, only if it's a keli lach that was used to measure out liquid items. Alva mizrakos, let's say it's a liquid cup, but it's not used to measure, like the liquid cup to use to catch the blood after you shecht. So it's not a measuring cup. So then even if you put dry things into it, mikachin, it wouldn't make it holy. Shenema, because the pasuk says shneim b'leim soilus. The pasuk says right over here, it says by the karbonos anasiyam, Shnehem Mizrak Echad, they had this thing called a Mizrak, which is generally used to catch liquids, but they were full of soilless, dry things, something flour. So therefore, it wouldn't make it kache. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Acham Difti, Ravina, so Rav Acham Difti said to Ravina, Mincha Slachihi. But what wouldn't you consider the mincha that was in that Mizrak like something like a liquid because it was mixed with oil? Not the entire mincha was mixed with oil. Some parts still remained dry. So, and it was put into this mizrak. And so therefore, and we see it became holy. A dry soilless, even if it's mixed with oil, when you compare it to blood, it's considered dry. So when the Chumash says that they put soilless, even if it was mixed with oil, into this mizrak, which was generally used, this mizrak was generally used to catch blood, and it became kodesh. So we see that a kli mizrak, not a measuring cup for a davar lach, could be mekadesh a davar yavish. Amar Shmuel said another idea. Kli sharis ein mekachin el shleiman. The kli sharis will not be mekadesh something only if it's complete. Again, kiddush means kiddush would mean that the thing cannot have pidyon anymore, and you probably cannot bring it outside the base of Mikdash anymore. You cannot bring it outside the base of Mikdash anymore. So now the Mishnah says, Ein mekachin ela malayin. It doesn't, only if it's complete. Ein mekachin, it won't be make it holy, ela malayin, only if you have the right amount shear in it. So if you put, let's say, a half a shear and you weren't measuring anything out of it, it wouldn't make it holy. Ein mekachin ela mitoichen, and it would not be mekadesh anything only if it's inside of it. So we're going to see what that means. What do you mean inside? I mean, where else are you going to put it? V'amri and others say ein mekachin ela shleimim umleim umibifnim. Shleimin umleim, and this adds mibifnim versus mitoichen over here. My benai, what's the difference? Ike benai berutze midos. See, according to the Brisa, the dry things have to be actually in the cup. But if it came above the rim of the cup, so then it wouldn't have any kedusha, the part that's, I guess, above the rim of the cup. But here, according to Shmuel, even if it's inside, as long as it's inside the cup, even though it's above the rim of the cup, it's heaped above the rim of the cup, it would still have kedusha. That's what berutze midas, the heaping of the midas. Here it adds both words. So metoichen and mibifnim, I guess it would agree to what Shmuel's idea is that even if it was heaping, you have a heaping dry cup. Let's say, and now why would it be heaping if it's a measuring cup? The answer is you're supposed to measure out a quarter of something, and a half of something, and you took the quarter cup, measuring cup, and you just heaped it up. So that would still make it kedusha dik. You took the wrong cup and you made it, and you heaped it up. That would be kedusha dik. Amar Rabasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo yishana lo shein dati lahoisev, dati lahoisev rishon kodesh. When did we say that it has to be milayim, the exact shear that you wanted to make holy? Let's say you're measuring soilus, right? You're measuring flour, and you didn't put in the right amount, so it doesn't become kedusha. But even if you didn't put the right amount in, but your intention was to eventually put the right amount in, you just didn't put it in all at once, right? So then, as soon as you put a little bit in, even that little bit becomes kedusha right away. So again, let's say you were supposed to measure out isarein soilus, right? And you put a quarter of isarein into the cup, but your intention was, let's say in 5 minutes time, to add more to it. So even the first part that you put in becomes kedusha dik right away. Tanya nami hachi maleim, ein maleim el shleimim. The maleim means it has to be the right shear. Amar Rabbi Yosi emasai b'zman shein da'at lahoisef. Aval da'at lahoisef. But if your intention was to add rishon kodesh, the only time that it doesn't become kodesh is if your intention is not to add. You put in a little bit of soilus into the measuring cup, it doesn't become kedusha dik. But if your intention was to measure out the isarein and you didn't do it all at once yet, so as soon as you add a little bit, it becomes kedusha dik. Then we said in the Mishnah, ein kli halach mekadesh. Amar Rav Yitemer Ravasi, ein mekachin li korav, aber mekachin li posel. When we say that a kli halach is not mekadesh, a davar yavesh, is only that it doesn't work, that you can't bring it now onto the mizbeach. Even if it was kosher and everything like that, but you use the wrong cup, so to speak, then you can't bring it onto mizbeach. But it does have holiness into it, that although you can't bring it onto the mizbeach, the mincha, if you put it into the wrong cup, you now have psulina to it, or you have puzzle that a tvil yain can touch it, kippurim. All these things are psul yaitse, because it does have some kedusha to it. Others say it's regarding this statement that was Rav Asi said. Menachos nesacham nechas behema merkurim min amaduma. You can't bring, let's say, flour offerings if it was made up of just a mixture of truma and chulin, because that could only be eaten by kahanim. And even though kohanim are the ones that eat the minchas, but still it has to be made out of flour that any Jew could eat. Certainly, you can't make it out of flour that was made from orla and klayakerem. Vim hevi. If you did bring it, like Kiddush, it doesn't become holy. If you did bring it, it doesn't become holy. Amaravi, Temeravasi, Loy Kirev Likarev, Avakidesh Li Pasol. Loy Kirev Likarev, Avakidesh Liban. This Ravasi said that although you brought it, it doesn't become holy, that you can't, obviously, it can't be put on the Mizbeach because it's made from something that's Osir Bahano or only can be eaten by Koyens, but it has a holiness that you cannot remove it from the Beis Hamikdash. It has a holiness that it has a psulina to it, or can't be touched by Tfil Yom. So it has some measure of holiness. Now we go on to a new topic over here. I really should have colored it differently, but a brand new topic of what happens if holy vessels, kalim, became damaged. Tanur Rabbanan, we learned in the Brisa, kliya kodesh nikvu. If a clay kodesh that got a hole in it, ein matichin oisen, you don't melt it down. Vein matichin l'soicha aver, you don't fill it up with lead, or plug the hole with lead. And the bottom line is, because even though technically it's a good fix, but the Beis Hamikdash is a rich place, and therefore we don't want to have damaged kalim or fixed kalim in the Beis Hamikdash. Nifgamu, if it became unusable, damaged, you don't fix it. And again, sakim shenivgam, a knife that became damaged. So ein mashchizines pigamasa, you don't sharpen it down. I mean, obviously, you do sharpen knives, but if it became so damaged that you really need an expert to sharpen it, to take away the ridge there, so then we just throw it away. We throw away the knife. Nishmita, let's say the knife fell out of the metal part, fell out of the handle. You don't return it to the handle. Abba Shoma says, Sakin meterech. There was a sakin, a knife, that made a lot of animals treif in the Beis Hamikdash. They were always fixing it. They always made that slight fix to this knife. The Nimnu Allah Kahanim Gnuzun. The Kahanim voted that they should hide the knife. Hide the knife, don't use it anymore, because this knife constantly needs a small fix to it. Tanu Rabbanim, the rabbis taught, Big Day Kahuna, ein oisen machat, machat. The clothing of the kohen, you don't make it into a maise machat. Maise machat, you don't make it like needlepoint, and you're adding pieces together. Elamaise orig, it's a woven in one piece. Shnema, because the pasuk says, Maase orig, you make the big day kahuna as one piece. You don't add different pieces and put it together. Here's the point. Nizga alof, it became soiled. The big day, the clothing of the kohen, ein mechapsen oisa loy benesa v'loy oil. You don't use any detergents or soap to clean it. Says the Gemara, Habamayim mechapsen, are you allowed to wash it in water? That's also the same problem. Rabbi explains, Hachikama, this is what the Brisa means to say. Hugu b'mayim, if it became so dirty that with a little water you could wash it, so it's not really that dirty, then you're allowed to use detergents, because technically you could get away with just using water. However, the Brisa says, we go to Amud Beis, Hugu l'neser v'ohal, if it became dirty enough that the only way to clean it is using detergents, so then af b'mayim ein mechapsim, then you're not allowed to clean it even with water, because it became so dirty that you must use detergents. Then already it's so dirty, we got to get rid of it. You can't wash any big day kahuna. Now, I don't know if this means that you can't wash it at all, because technically you're in the dirty business. You're always handling oil and wine and blood. But I guess if it became like noticeably stained, so then we don't wash them. You got to get a new one. And this is the point of everything that we just learned. Shein aniyas bimkoy mashirs. The place of the Beis Hamikdash is a place of wealth, and we don't do what poor people do in a place of wealth, where there's wealth. And therefore, as soon as something becomes semi-dirty or semi-unusable, they would replace it in the Beis HaMikdash. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, Me'il kula shel tcheles haya. The me'il was made out of tcheles. Shnem abiyas as a me'il ha'efe klil tcheles. Shulav ketza, the bottom of the me'il, how was it made? Maybe tcheles v'agamos la'ashani shuzurim. V'oisen oisen kamin rimoinim shloi pitchu piem u'kamin koinoish shel kanosei shabrashi tinekais. They would make, so basically, you might as well see a picture over here. Here is the me'il, and it's made with blue wool, purple wool, red wool, all woven together, as you can see in this picture over here, where I'm pointing over here. Then this was stuff that was used to make the me'il. Let me make it bigger. Then on the bottom of it, you had these, you see the blue parts of the me'il of this. First of all, the whole thing was made of tcheles, but the blue part of the me'il had these balls that looked like a pomegranate that wasn't open yet, didn't have the flower on top, or like a helmet, in between bells that had a anvil in it. So that's the me'il. You have a pomegranate bell, pomegranate bell, pomegranate bell. That's what it's written in the psukim. Umaybe shimim ushnayim zogin shebehem shim shnayim in belim. You bring 72 bells that had 72 anvils within them. V'toyle behem, and you hang them onto the me'il, on the bottom of the me'il. It made noise. The bells made noise with the pomegranates in between. The number 72 is shloishim l'shisha b'tzad zeh, or shloishim l'shisha b'tzad deh. 36 on one side and 36 on the other side. Of Doisei Mishum Rabbi Yehuda, he says shloishim l'shisha hoya. It was actually 36. Shmoinasam mishad zeh, shmoinasam mishad zeh. 18 on this side, 18 on this side. So I think it means 18 bells, and obviously in between each bell you put a blue pomegranate. That's that was made of blue wool, purple wool, and red wool. So that's either it was 18 or 72. Rabbi Inini Bar Sosin, here's a funny name. Inini Bar Sosin said, Klam, just like we have a machlokes whether it was 72 or 36 according to Rab Doisa. Kach machlokes Bar Maris Negoim. In Nega, what are the different shades of colors could there be in Negoim? Tanan Maris Negoim. Rab Doisa ben Horkin is Omer Lamed Vav. Rab Doisa is aligned with his opinion that says it's 36. Makavi ben Mahalo Omer Shivin Shnaim. Makavi ben Mahalo, so there were 72 different variations of colors. Again, we're going to learn that the me'il was worn by the kohen, and somehow that brought about a kapara for somebody who did lashon hara, which is similar to maris negoyim. So we're going to learn right now this concept of all the begodim of the kohen. So let's look at the picture of all the begodim of the kohen. Here I have the bigdei kahuna. You have the ephod, you have the choshen, the ephod, the me'il. Here's the me'il with the bells. The kesoines, the mechnasayim, the hat, the tzitz, and the gartel. Right. These are the bigdei kohen gadol. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now, each one of them brought about a kapara. It means that, of course, you need to do tshuva if you do an aveira. But when you do an aveira, somehow it's hard to erase it from your soul, so to speak, or you're drawn to do that aveira again. But because the kohen gadol wore these clothing, that sort of helped you with your tshuva and brought about a total kapara, so that you're not drawn to do the avera again. So we'll see that each of the begodim of the kohen gadol brought about a kapara for something else. So we're going to finish up over here. The parshas karbonis is next to the parsha of bigdei kahuna. Tells you ma karbonis mechaprim av bigdei kahuna mechaprim. So just like a carbon brings about a kapara, so also the clothing worn by the kohen gadol brought about a kapara. Kesoines, what would the shirt bechaperes al shvichas dam? Kesoines brought about a kapara for somebody who killed. Obviously, you need to do tshuva, but it brought about some sort of kapara for that person. Shnema, in this week's parsha, so we see the kesinus has to do with murder, with blood. Bichnasayim, the pants worn by the Kohen Gadol, Bichaperes al Gili Aroyish, Nema, Vasei Lehem, Michnesei Bad, Chasis Bzar Erva. So the pants brought about a kapara for anybody who sinned with immorality. Mitznefes, the hat brought about a kapara, and you would think you need to actually do an avera. Here is an avera a person does just by his thoughts. Mechaperes al gasi ruach, somebody with an inflated ego. Minayim, shenema someone who has an inflated ego thinks he's superior than other people. So the hat, which is brought on the superior head of the Kohen Gadol, brought about a kapara for somebody who had an inflated ego. Avnei, the gartel, b'chapal al hiru leiv. When you have your heart motivates you to think in negative or think in an avera, so that's what was the gartel brought. That what the kapara that the gartel had. Choishin, the breastplate, mechapel adinim, shnema v'chsisi choish mishpat. If Bezdin did judged wrong, so then the choishin brought about a kapara for that. The ephod, the apron, mechapel avodah zarah, shnema ein ephod usrafim. Ephod is rafim, so is a pasuk in Isaiah, which that connects ephod to avodah zarah. So the apron brought about a kapara of avodah zarah. Again, avodah zarah was an avera that a person loses his identity. Of course, you did kapara, so then you have, if you did tshuva, of course you get kapara, but the total kapara was through the ephod. The me'il mechapar lashon hara. Why did the me'il brought kapara on somebody who spoke lashon hara? Menayin, Rab Chanina says yavad dava shebakol v'chapar kol hara. Something that makes noise, holy noise, should bring about a kapara of someone who made avera noise. That's what the kapara was by the kohen wearing the me'il brought about a kapara on lashon hara. B'tzitz, the head, the tzitz, which is brought on the forehead, the cover of the forehead. So mechaper al azus panim, somebody who's arrogant, who is brazen, who is not in touch with his own self-conscious. But sits ksiv hoya meitzach aaron uvazus panim ksiv umeitzach isha zayin hayalach. When somebody doesn't listen to his intuition and overcomes his intuition, which tells him something is don't do this or what you're doing is wrong or cruel, so that's azus panim. And the tzitz, so when someone does tshuva on that, again, the tzitz helped you do the tshuva. So now the Gemara just finishes off the Gemara over here with one final question. Eini, we learned something different. But Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Rabbi, you just told me that the ill brought about kapara on lashon hara, but that's not true. The Ketoris brought kapara on lashon hara. Shnei dvarim lamitzin lehem kapara bakabonos mitzin le kapara mimochem acher. The elu hein shvichas damim v'lashon hara. Shvichas damim and lashon hara had kapara from another place. Shvichas damim me'egla rufa. Shvichas damim, the kapara is brought about through the egla rufa. For lashon hara, people who spoke lashon hara had kapara not from the me'il but from ketoris. Tani Rab Chanina, how do I know that ketara brings kapara? Shnema v'yitin es ketoris v'chapel al ha'am. Utar Rabbi Shmuel, Alma Ketoris v'chaperes. What did the incense bring kapara? Al lashon hara. The smoky incense that they brought in the sanctuary was brought about a kapara on lashon hara. Yova davash v'chashai. Let something that's silent be chapel ma'aseh chashai should bring about a kapara on something done in silence. Usually, lashon hara at times can be done anonymously. So kasha lashon hara, kasha shvichas damam. You told me lashon hara had the kapara through the me'il. This brisa says, Rab Chanina told us it had a kapara from the ketoris. You told me shvichas damin was the shirt of the kohen gadol. Here it's egla rufa. So how do you resolve these questions? Like kasha, it's not difficult. Ha the idea man katle. If you know who killed him, And then the Kesoinus brought about the shirt brought about the kapara. The lo yedid man katle. If you don't know who killed somebody, then the Egel of Rufa brought kapara. So and what it doesn't bring kapara for that person, it brings kapara for everybody, because when someone is killed, it's a public problem. Says the Gemara, how could the Kesoinus bring about a kapara from somebody we know who he killed? We know who the murderer is. If we know who the murderer is, bar katalahu, shouldn't you kill the murderer? And says the Gemara, if he did it on purpose and he wasn't warned, so therefore we can't kill him. So he's hanging around, and let's say he does tshuva, then the Kesoinus brought about a kapara for that. And even if the guy himself, the murderer, doesn't do tshuva, but everybody else needs a kapara because they have this murderer amongst them. So that's a public issue that needed a kapara. Lashon hara nami leikash. It's not difficult. Again, the question was, you told me that the me'il brought about a kapara on lashon hara, and we know that the Keteris brought about a kapara on lashon hara. And says the Gemara, Habetzina, Habefayhasa. If it's a public lashon hara, we know he did it in public. He wasn't ashamed to speak lashon hara in public. So that's the me'il brought about a kapara. If the person who perpetrated the lashon hara did it silently, he did it online, anonymously, but again, he spread lashon hara, so he also needs a kapara. So that kapara was brought about by the Keteris. So Hadon Allah Mizbeach Makadesh, and Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we'll begin with the 10th parak of Masechta Zevachim.